You're not cold. You were trained to survive without warmth. Everyone keeps telling you to be strong, but no one ever taught you what real strength actually is. They applauded your silence, mistook your numbness for peace, and called your shutdowns maturity. But deep down, you always knew something was off. The truth? You were never weak. You were just never allowed to feel. And when you did, you were told to hide it, choke it down, or perform over it. What you called control was actually a defense. What you thought was your personality was just your trauma dressed up as self-sufficiency. But that's not the end of your story. It's the starting point. In this video, we'll dive deep into the wounds you were never allowed to name and show how reclaiming your right to feel is the key to finally feeling free. The origin of false strength. Somewhere along the way, people started to confuse silence with maturity. A child cries and hears, "That's enough." A teen breaks down and gets told, "Be strong." Slowly but surely, the lesson takes root. Emotions make you weak. Carl Jung would call this the repression of the inner life, the refusal to feel as a survival tactic. Instead of developing emotional wisdom, many crafted a persona, one that looked solid outside but was secretly cracking within. And the sad part? Society clapped. The more someone shut down, the more they were praised as resilient. This kind of strength is a lie dressed in armor. It's what happens when psychoanalysis becomes taboo and philosophy gets replaced by performance. People walk around like marble statues, untouchable, unreadable, unfeeling, not realizing that what they call control is often just a trauma response. The shadow isn't erased by denial. It's only fed in silence. And ironically, the tighter you hold your emotions in, the more likely they'll explode at the worst moment. Think of the boss who never cried but raged at interns, or the friend who seemed stable but ghosted everyone the day they cracked. The mind, like a muscle, needs movement to stay alive. Yet so many were taught that stillness equals peace, that quiet equals strength. But that stillness was actually a freeze that began when crying became shameful. A boy falls and doesn't cry, not because it didn't hurt, but because the fear of judgment hurts more. That's not resilience, that's resistance. Carl Jung would say that this rigid identity forms part of the false self, disconnected from the fluid nature of truth and expression. The child wanted comfort. The adult became cold. False strength becomes a badge of honor in a culture that rewards repression. The human mind, layered with years of unspoken grief, keeps marching like a soldier, functional but fractured. Deep down, the individual knows something's off. There's an ache that no success can soothe, an insomnia that no therapy quote can fix. And yet, asking for help feels like betrayal. They learned early, don't be a burden. So they carry their story in silence, even when their spine is screaming. That's not adulthood. That's emotional exile. Here's the twist. Real power doesn't come from pretending. It comes from permission. The art of living is in learning when to hold on and when to break. Wisdom, after all, is knowing that no truth is too heavy for the soul to carry, especially not your own. Those who dare to feel, to fall, to cry, they're not collapsing, they're cleansing. Because while the world celebrates the stoic, it forgets that the one who weeps might be the one finally healing. And as we follow that tear, it leads us back to where everything started, to a childhood that never had room for emotion. The childhood that had no room for emotion. Childhood should be a sanctuary for the soul, a place where emotion flows freely like a river after rain. But for many, it became a battlefield of suppression. Sensitive children, those gifted with deep feeling, were often told they were too much, too emotional, too dramatic, too needy. Carl Jung understood this as the first fracture in the individuation process. The moment the child's inner life had to split off from their outer world just to survive. And so, the shadow began to form, not out of evil, but out of the need to hide what was never allowed to exist. When a child hears, "Stop crying," enough times, it starts to believe that tears are dangerous. That's not discipline, it's emotional abandonment. Psychoanalysis teaches that what isn't expressed becomes repressed, and repression hardens into psychic armor. A kid who once sobbed freely now stares blankly at disappointment. A teenager avoids connection because it feels too risky. These aren't signs of maturity, they're the residue of survival. The mind adapts to rejection by numbing. The body remembers what it wasn't allowed to release. And the soul, it waits patiently, hoping someone, someday, will finally say, "It's okay to feel." There's something deeply tragic about a child learning to smile through pain. That smile isn't joy, it's armor. When emotion becomes a threat to belonging, the human mind makes a brutal trade: authenticity for acceptance. And this early programming runs deep. It shows up in adults who laugh when they're hurt, who apologize for crying, who can't say, "I'm struggling," without feeling ashamed. That's not weakness, that's conditioning. Carl Jung called this the loss of contact with the self, where one's truth becomes buried under layers of performance and fear. This emotional exile doesn't just disappear with age. It calcifies into the adult personality, the one who avoids conflict, who detaches in relationships, who confuses numbness with peace. The blocked energy of childhood becomes the rigidity of adulthood. Wisdom gets replaced with control. Vulnerability becomes dangerous. But here's the paradox. The very sensitivity that was once shamed holds the key to healing. That child, the one who was told to toughen up, didn't disappear. They just learned to hide. And that inner child still carries the map, not just to the pain, but to the possibility of freedom. So now we find ourselves face to face with a haunting truth. What was repressed didn't die. It crystallized. The tears we never cried, the truths we never spoke, the fears we swallowed whole. They became our armor. But armor is heavy, and sooner or later, the soul begins to ache beneath all that weight. What if that ache isn't weakness, but an invitation? What if it's the signal that it's time to stop surviving and start remembering how to feel? The false narrative of self-sufficiency. Modern society loves to glorify the lone wolf, the one who handles everything alone, never cries, never complains, never asks for help. But behind this shiny mask of self-sufficiency, there's often a human being silently collapsing. Carl Jung warned of this collective illusion, mistaking emotional suppression for psychological strength. In truth, many of these strong individuals are simply wounded children in adult bodies, using performance as protection. What looks like resilience is often survival, and what we call independence is, more often than not, the residue of abandonment. People who seem the most put together are sometimes the ones unraveling on the inside. You know the type. Always available, always calm, always in control. But when the night falls and the applause fades, they stare at the ceiling with a heart full of unrest. Anxiety, insomnia, panic. They aren't signs of weakness. They're the body begging for relief from years of emotional captivity. Psychoanalysis teaches that the repressed self will always return, through the back door, through the dreams, through the symptoms we try to ignore. The self can't be silenced forever. Self-sufficiency, for many, became a necessity, not a choice. When no one came to soothe the pain, the mind learned to self-soothe through detachment. When vulnerability was met with ridicule, the soul armored itself with silence. This isn't strength. It's a brilliant but exhausting strategy of survival. And yet, society continues to clap. She's so strong. He doesn't need anyone. Meanwhile, their inner life is starving. Their shadow grows. Their conscience whispers that something's off. But the show must go on, right? The truth is, no one is meant to carry life alone. The human mind is relational. It needs reflection, resonance, and real connection. Even the archetype of the hero in mythology never journeys alone. They always meet a guide, a helper, a companion. That's not coincidence, it's wisdom. The art of living is not mastering isolation, but learning how to soften. To admit you need help is not failure. It's the beginning of healing. One example: try calling someone when you're down instead of pretending. Try saying, "I need support," and watch what shifts. And here's the irony. The real strength we're all looking for, it doesn't come from control. It comes from permission. Permission to feel, to falter, to ask, to receive. The more we honor our humanity, the less we need to perform it. Because buried beneath the performance lies something ancient and alive. The self that remembers, that longs, that aches to feel again. And perhaps that ache isn't here to break us, but to lead us towards something we've been avoiding for too long: the healing power of vulnerability. The healing power of vulnerability. Here's the twist no one teaches us growing up. Vulnerability isn't weakness, it's medicine. Carl Jung knew this. He saw that the path to individuation, to becoming whole, required turning toward what we've spent a lifetime avoiding. To feel deeply, to cry without shame, to admit, "I'm hurt." That's not collapse, that's courage. And yet, we live in a world that rewards emotional numbness and punishes sensitivity. But numbness is not peace. It's paralysis. The mind might be still, but only because the heart has gone into hiding. Emotions are energy in motion. When blocked, they stagnate, turning into symptoms: tight chests, clenched jaws, sudden rage, numb mornings. Vulnerability allows that energy to move again. Think of it like thawing ice. The melt might be messy, but it's a return to life. Psychoanalysis teaches us that what we repress becomes the unconscious material driving our lives in silence. So crying, that's not a meltdown. That's liberation. It's how the human mind flushes out what the soul can no longer hold in. There's wisdom in tears, not weakness. Allowing ourselves to be seen, really seen, creates bridges where walls once stood. Vulnerability is what turns relationships into soul connections. It's the moment you say, "I'm not okay," and someone replies, "You don't have to be." That's where healing begins. In a world obsessed with filters and performance, raw truth is revolutionary. Want to practice? Share one thing today you've been hiding. Not for attention, but for release. Whether it's with a friend, a journal, or in front of a mirror, express it. Speak it. Let breathe. Healing isn't linear, and it isn't glamorous. Sometimes it looks like sobbing in the shower. Sometimes it's a shaky voice saying, "I need help." Sometimes it's letting go of the illusion that you got it all figured out. Carl Jung believed that wholeness required integration, not perfection. That means welcoming the rejected parts, the messy parts, the soft parts. Vulnerability is the door. And when you walk through it, you start to hear your own voice again. Not the one shaped by fear, but the one shaped by truth. The moment you stop trying to be invincible is the moment you start becoming real. Realness cracks the shell of control and lets light in. That light, raw, honest, imperfect, is what begins to dissolve the shadow. And maybe, just maybe, the tears you've been holding back for years aren't a breakdown, but a breakthrough. A quiet rebellion. A soft revolution. One that's not about fixing yourself, but finally giving yourself permission to feel. Recovering the right to feel. You were never too sensitive. You were just never given the space to be whole. Carl Jung would call this the wounded self, the one buried beneath layers of adaptation. So many carry the false belief that they're broken, when in truth, they're simply frozen. Frozen in the exact moment they had to trade vulnerability for survival. But here's what most people don't realize. The body remembers. Every uncried tear, every silent scream, every held-back emotion lives somewhere inside. In the breath, in the posture, in the nervous system. And one day, it demands to be felt. Reconnecting with your emotions isn't about becoming someone else. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you to shut down. And this remembering is not mental. It's embodied. Try this. Next time a wave of sadness rises, don't distract yourself. Sit with it. Put your hand on your heart and breathe. Let the body lead. That's how the human mind begins to repair its fractured dialogue with the self. Psychoanalysis reminds us, what is felt is healed. Expression isn't indulgence. It's the only bridge back to authenticity. This journey back to feeling is, in fact, a return to wisdom. Not the kind you read in books, but the kind your bones carry. Sensitivity is not a flaw. It's a compass. Emotions are not inconveniences. They're messengers. When you feel anger, it might be the boundary you never enforced. When you feel grief, it might be the love you weren't allowed to show. Reclaiming your right to feel is reclaiming your right to truth. And truth, in its rawest form, doesn't ask for approval. It asks for permission. The process of healing is messy. There will be moments where your throat tightens, your eyes sting, your chest aches, and instead of pushing it down, you'll let it rise. That's the work. That's where freedom begins. The goal isn't to feel good all the time. It's to feel fully. Carl Jung taught that individuation is not about becoming perfect, but becoming integrated. To welcome the darkness, the light, and everything in between. And as you do, you start to remember that you were never weak, just disconnected. And in that reconnection, something miraculous happens. Life returns. Colors get brighter. Music hits deeper. The mind no longer feels like a battlefield. Because once the emotions start flowing, the soul starts speaking. And when the soul speaks, healing isn't just possible, it becomes inevitable. And perhaps, for the first time in a long time, you finally feel free enough to begin again. How long will you keep calling survival a personality trait? How many more nights will you spend holding it all in, pretending it doesn't hurt, just to be seen as strong? The truth is, strength isn't about silence. It's about honesty. It's about finally looking at the shadow, acknowledging the pain you've buried, and choosing not to abandon yourself this time. Carl Jung said, "What you resist persists." So what would happen if, just for once, you stopped resisting your own heart? You don't need permission to feel, but maybe you've been waiting for it anyway. So here it is. It's safe to cry. It's brave to say, "I'm not okay." It's powerful to admit you need support. The human mind doesn't heal through logic alone. It heals through expression, through connection, through letting go of that inner dictator that calls emotion a weakness. The next time you feel that ache rising in your chest, don't swallow it. Listen, that's not weakness. That's the door to everything you've been searching for. So now I'll ask you, what feeling are you finally ready to stop running from? What truth inside you is begging to be seen, held, expressed? If this video cracks something open in you, don't let it stop here. Leave a comment, even if it's just a word, a tear, a sigh. And if you're ready to keep peeling back the layers, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Because we're just getting started, and you deserve to feel everything.